I'm Liz. This is Dresden. We're going to talk today about purity culture, unraveling its influences on identity and relationships. We're also going to go into some rather surprising things that we discovered as we were doing our research. I'm going to pause. Don't change it quite yet. Before we even start the presentation, though, we just kind of want to go through a couple of basics, which includes where the exits are. In case of emergency, please follow exit signs. If you need to use the restroom, you don't need to wait for a pause. You don't even need to wait until the end of the presentation. Feel free to leave anytime. The doors are not locked. As some people just said, the bathrooms are near the entrance of the building where you guys probably came in by the front tables. Just follow the signs and you should be able to find it. Okay, so we would like to give you all a trigger warning. We'd like to put forth that aspects of this presentation and this material may be triggering for some. While it is impossible to speak about purity culture without speaking about sex or abuse, we will not be going into any details. Don't worry about that. We'd like you to just be aware. We would please feel free to care for yourself as you feel is necessary. And if there's something you would like to chat about afterwards, please come find us around where we are here. Land acknowledgement. Hold on one second. So, although the content that we're going to be getting into is pretty heavy, we do just want to let you know that at the end of this presentation, there will be support resources. And we also have these QR codes, which are up here, but I also put them on a little table over here. So if you need to sneak out early, you can grab one on the way out at the end. Also, feel free to grab a couple if you want to hand them to anyone. It's basically just a website with some recommended books, scholarly articles, podcasts, and professional support if anyone needs those. And also at the end, we'll be taking questions, so please save them for that point. And then also, before we begin, we'd like to take a moment to recognize the land we are gathered on. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Ganakagahan Nation, and they are part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and they have acted as the keepers of this land, called Jojake in their language, for generations. This area has also been a historical gathering for many First Nations, including the Anishinaabe and the Huron-Wendat. We offer this acknowledgement as a gesture of respect and responsibility, especially as this presentation discusses purity culture and systems of control, many of which are rooted in colonial and religious impositions on Indigenous bodies, beliefs, and lives. So, I invite all of us to go inwards for a moment and reflect on our awareness of and our intentionality towards the land we are gathered on and its Indigenous peoples. I invite you to simply notice what comes up for you as you turn your attention to this. There may be thoughts or feelings, perhaps there is imagery, or perhaps you notice sensations in your body. Whatever comes up for you, I simply invite you to notice it and consider it. We would also like to acknowledge that we come at this subject from our individual perspectives. I, Liz, come from the perspective of a cisgendered, white, older woman who joined a fundamentalist evangelical church after being a teenager in the evangelical movement. And I, in terms of like biases, I'm also white and was born female and come from the United States. And although I was born female, I guess I identify as non-binary or queer now. And hear your here, sorry. Oh, sorry. Perspectives, references. So why are we here today? Last year, while we were in Barcelona, we were walking on the beach, Dresden and I, and we were commenting on some of our aspects of our past, and our conversation turned to purity culture and how those beliefs have affected our lives today. And we realized this could be an interesting topic. So here we are. For those who don't already know me, my name is Dresden Andrea. I'm currently a student at Arizona State University studying social and behavioral sciences. I'm hoping to graduate by the end of this year. I'm very excited. Something else I just started is a fellowship for Generation Human Rights. This summer, they're doing several projects, and the one that I'm mainly assigned to is the Youth for Rights, for Your Rights podcast. I'm very excited. I'll probably be doing most of the, I'm probably going to do most of the research behind that. And then the other kind of main projects that they're doing that I'll probably also lend a helping hand is the Humanist magazine, which is published by the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights. And then they also create curriculum for K through 12 in the States. And then they have social media and blogs and a newsletter. After I graduate from Arizona State University, I'm hoping to go on to study coercive control. And eventually, the end goal is to be a human rights researcher. My passion stems from my upbringing, so I can't really talk about myself without talking about a little bit of my family and my upbringing. So my parents divorced when I was 2.5, and my father, my biological father, is more secular, although still very patriarchal in ideology. And then my mom remarried. She put me in a private Christian academy, and is also very patriarchal, and they were more religious though and had a more fundamentalist Christian upbringing. They didn't, I guess we didn't really go to like a certain sector of Christianity though. We kind of hopped from different churches and just pulled certain ideas from each one. And the churches that we would go to were mostly non-denominational, Baptist, evangelical, and apostolistic. So that's kind of what I have been exposed to in terms of doctrine.
So I'm Liz, in case anybody didn't know that already. I'm a survivor of a 20-year stint in an evangelical cultic organization. I managed to escape almost 20 years ago. It was a joyous day. I now work as a psychotherapist. Part of my recovery was going back to school and became a psychotherapist. I specialize in grief and trauma, particularly cultic trauma. The grief part is because I was also widowed and thought I can help other people through that. But the intersection of grief and trauma has always been my fascination.
So besides going back to me now, I guess, besides all of those churches that we hopped around, I also was a part of a lot of Christian organizations like Awana, Teens for Christ, Vacation Bible School, if anyone's familiar with those ones, and a lot of Christian camps in the summertime. I'm only going to talk about one of them today because there's just a lot of supportive resources for its parallels between colonialism and purity culture. So this is the shining star for today for me. It's called Strawberry Lake Christian Retreat, and it's located in northern Minnesota on the White Earth Indian Reservation, and it was established by Reverend Gerald Durstein, who's on the right. He's an ex-Mennonite reverend. I don't know the title that the Mennonites used, but he was kicked out for being too extreme and for his premonitions of God. And on his left, you can see his son. Oh my God, it's Bill Durstein. It's all right. It's fine. And together, they leaded the ministerial association called Gospel Crusade, through which they established hundreds of churches, schools, and orphanages globally. Don't do anything. Among those was at least 260 churches in Haiti, a 95-acre ministry campus in Honduras, and according to their website, where I got a lot of these images from and numbers from, they also have a presence in Israel and India and Nicaragua from other research that I've seen. The Dursteins were vocal leaders for the shepherding movement, or otherwise known as the discipleship movement, if you're familiar. If you don't know it, it's a controversial movement that promotes strict spiritual obedience and accountability through close mentoring relationships, primarily with the charismatic renewal movement of the 1970s. Click. So when I was reminiscing and making this presentation about this camp, I just really remembered this sign, and I'm so happy that I found it on Facebook because Gerald Durstein has 4 kids. We'll talk about Phil the most. But his daughter posted this where she rejuvenated this sign that was posted at the beach right down the road from the church that I went to, or the camp that I went to. And it encourages a one-piece swimsuit. And I just remember as like an 11-year-old when I was there, even if my one-piece swimsuit was too low in the back, I would have to wear a t-shirt over it. And I was fortunate to be a little bit more flat-chested because I remember another girl who had developed a little bit more earlier in life was forced to wear an oversized t-shirt and shorts every time. And I just remember being an 11-year-old learning how to swim and like in a big lake that was scary and being bogged down by all that clothing. The irony of this sign though is that Gerald Durstein actually had to forfeit over the leadership of the camp when he was accused of sexual abuse of a minor at that church. The lawsuit was settled out of court. He just had to pay some money. And then he basically fled to Florida. And his son, Phil, has a church there called the Family Church. And it's also connected to a Christian retreat. I think it might be called Strawberry Lake as well. I'm not sure. But yeah, aside from that, though, he really didn't experience any other punishment. And he lived out the rest of his years. So we'll discuss the Dursteins more in this presentation. So describing these bad actors is incredibly crucial for explaining the context behind the lessons I learned growing up, particularly around sexuality and purity. I've learned a couple of metaphors that I'm most familiar with, but I'm sure many people have other metaphors as well that they had their sexuality compared to. So the main one was the apple one. That's the one I know the most as a metaphor. And the thing about this metaphor, as it was taught to me, is, the first time it was like, when you're born, you're given this pure apple. And if you engage in premarital sex, it is as if that man is taking a bite of that apple. So by the time you end up being married, the apple will be rotten and it'll be disgusting to your future husband, and it'll just be a burden basically on the relationship. But as I heard the story over and over, it changed more and more to not just premarital sex, but kissing, holding hands, hugging, coming in within 6 inches of a boy, leave room for Jesus, stuff like that. Anyone else know that one? So yeah, that's one of them. One of the books that I learned this lesson from, but I also heard it through voices, was from my grandma, called Apples of Gold, A Parable of Purity. If anyone wants to check that out, it's just up here, along with other books that we have. Fun stuff. Those ones are recovery, though. These ones are purity. Don't mix those up. The tale basically is of 2 sisters, one beautiful and one describing herself as ugly. By the end, there's a princely character, and they present these apples that they had to carry on a journey to him. The social one and evil one had allowed men to take bites of her apple, and he was grossed out. And the ugly one presented her perfect apple, and he was very pleased with this, married her, and then enjoyed her apple, which was fun to read as a child. It's supposed to be presented for young audiences. But another metaphor that you guys might be familiar with is the rose one. I think that this handout actually sums it up really well. I'm just going to read it. You're like a beautiful rose. Each time you engage in premarital sex, a precious petal is stripped away. Don't leave your future husband holding a bare stem. Abstain. Now, something that was taught in parallel to this lesson for me was that anything I did with a boy at a young age was the equivalent of cheating on my future husband. So at 16, I was given a purity ring. I don't know if anybody else has them, but I'm sure you're familiar with the concept at the very least, if you're familiar with purity culture. So the story behind me receiving this ring, I didn't know I was getting it that night. I was about 15, and I remember my mom and my stepdad telling me to go put on my fanciest dress. And I went down to my room and I put on a dress that I felt comfortable in. I really wasn't used to the special attention. Like, this was way different than even for my birthday. So I was like, okay, I guess I'll put on a dress that I feel comfy in that's kind of fancy. And they just told me, that's not good enough. Go put on another. We repeated this like 4 times. And finally, I came out with this really fancy dress that I was really uncomfortable in. And they brought me to a really nice restaurant. And I don't remember the lecture that they gave me about abstinence. I think I've pretty much blocked that out. But I do remember actively trying to shut down the conversation because I was like, I'm not interested in boys. You don't need to tell me this. I'm not ready. So I just didn't even want to enter that process at all. I did, however, have a curiosity for girls at this point, but I would not admit this to myself, much less to my parents. So at the time, I was also very, very dedicated to my religion and to their interpretation of it for me. And so I wore the purity ring very proudly, and I actually used it to ward off some boys. So Now we're going to go into funding just a little bit. The figure that I found for this is a minimum of $2 billion that the US government has spent on abstinence-only education programs. However, after my research, I don't think that this is very accurate, mainly because this is a domestic number. Things like missionaries going to other countries and introducing this doctrine of purity and other things to other countries costs a lot of money, and that's not going to be reflected in this number. However, we know money is being or has been funneled into this. So it does show up in tangible ways. And for example, on July 29th, 1994, thousands of teenagers are gathered in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., pledging their sexual abstinence until marriage. Well-funded campaigns like True Love Waits, which I'm more familiar with, and Silver Ring Thing were labeled as public health efforts. These campaigns encourage teens to sign contracts with God, wear rings as symbols of virginity, and link their worth to sexual restraint. Abstinence-only curriculum really leaves out essential topics like consent, sexual health, and identity, and instead offers metaphors like chewed gum and the rose petal and apple,
And crumpled paper.
crumpled paper. Wasn't there another one you mentioned last time?
Don't let the glove get dirty.
Glove.
All of them, anything.
A lot of things. And this idea is just so harmful to survivors of assault and queer people and anyone who really doesn't fit that mold, specifically for survivors of assault. If you think about, that apple getting bitten into, there's really no way to undo that. And it's just harmful, toxic.
So, after all of that, what technically is purity culture? It is a belief system put forth by evangelicalism, as we can see now with some political backing, in North America, mainly, that emphasizes abstinence from sex before marriage. So what's wrong with that idea? We're going to look at what went wrong with the idea by looking at a bit of history. So we're going to start back a couple 100 and so years ago, and we have the suffragist movement. While much of the difficulty associated with purity culture has been felt by women, much damage has also been inflicted on men. That's not something either one of us can speak to except to acknowledge that it happened and hope that those men will be able to find the help that they need. We also wish to acknowledge that to many, staying pure until marriage is a personal value has nothing to do with their religious aspects or religious beliefs. A personal decision is not what we're looking at with the discussion of purity culture. When an individual's worth is tied to their sexual behavior, that's not providing the opportunity to make their own choice. So, back to history. Sorry, I forgot about that earlier. Suffragism. While the concept of virginity as righteous has been important for centuries, marriage previous to the mid to late 1800s was more often transactional rather than because two people fell in love. Virginity was an essential aspect of maintaining family succession, keeping women safe, ensuring that the continuation of family expectations, land, and fortunes happened. By the late 1800s, women were beginning, by force if necessary, to shed the shackles placed on them by a society convinced women were the weaker sex, less capable than men in every area. Suffragism was one of the signs of the times, a beginning step. The men were going to war for World War I, or the Great War as it was called. And what did the women do? They picked up and were allowed to do the jobs that men had done. Women proved themselves more than capable, and sometimes more capable than the men at many of these jobs. Women also served for the first time on the battlefield as nurses, support staff, such as ambulance drivers. These situations caused great consternation once the war was ended, as many women had discovered that they were more than what they had been told they were, and they were more able than they had been made to believe. The expectation that all women would return to their former roles and do that quietly was proven incorrect, because we had the Roaring Twenties. And in the Roaring Twenties, skirts were shorter, arms were bare, and there was loads of cash floating around. Many of the religious leaders were in fear, abject terror with many of the religious leaders. All right? In Great Depression, Some religious leaders contended that the financial struggles of 1929 and beyond were God's judgment on the world because of the previous decade of debauchery and lack of moral fiber, which is a very interesting political situation because here is a pile of men blaming this on women yet again. Okay? A little bit of my feminism coming through. In the Second World War, now called first, no longer called First World War, women filled in when men went off to war, and more women were involved in actual service, actively fighting the fight, including my own aunt. So she was one of the ones that went to war. This time when war was over, there was an even greater determination that women were not going to return to the kitchen, so to speak. So post-war, late 1950s, bringing us to this period of peace and prosperity, women again were encouraged to return to the household so that men could, quote, have their jobs back. There were government financial incentives put into place as well as organized encouragements within religious establishments tied in with what the governmental institutions were attempting to do regarding the importance of living life as God would want it. Interestingly, there was also a significant increase in the research, availability, prescription, and use of medication for women for sleep disorders, anxiety, depression, and other nervous disorders during the 50s. Significant increase. So we come to the 60s. Women were working hard to increase their opportunities and the recognition and acceptance of their equality and true capabilities. Again, religious and political forces combined to diligently work against this force to discredit those attempts by those unbiblical feminists. To create even more furor, those who had been working for years on a contraceptive device that women could look after themselves had succeeded, and the birth control pill was released in various countries in the earliest parts of the decade, for married women only, of course. Okay. In the 70s, led, according to the majority of religious leaders, to the decade of free love, the hippie movement, a great deal of dissent, as well as significant decline in the levels of morality, all according to religious leaders. Women were now able to be in charge of their own fertility, leading to an increase in economic power for women, to greater access to education and to greater choice, which also led to this aspect of Roe versus Wade in 1973, which women worked very hard to achieve. And men. Okay. All of these factors came together during the 1980s, especially with some political factions, as well as more evangelically fundamental religious groups, to worry about the moral decline of young people. The growing social, economic, and political strength of women, which could then have an effect on those traditional values of home and homestead. The push for purity and all the aspects of this concept became a major force within evangelical and fundamentalist groups. Purity pledges, purity balls, purity rings became symbols of vows made by girls in their teens, as well as those as young as 8 to 10 years old, to remain pure until marriage, ages when children shouldn't even know anything about sexuality. Okay? According to some research, the strength of purity culture has reduced significantly in the past number of years. But as a former member of a fundamentalist cultic organization and as a therapist, I can tell you that I would wholeheartedly disagree. I hear about damage inflicted on both men and women by purity culture on a regular basis. And what are the beliefs and tenets of purity culture? You probably already know these. The aspect of being able to put them in here quickly and succinctly kind of helps our understanding of what's going on. So, abstinence from sex before marriage. This doesn't say what kind of sex. This doesn't say anything. You just have to stay pure. As Dresden said, eventually it became 6 inches apart. Otherwise, you had a bite out of your apple. Virginity is righteous, tied in with your spirituality, something to be proud of. If you have chosen to have sex, you're impure. If you've been assaulted, you are impure. because you obviously did something to encourage the assault. Bodies are inherently sexual and therefore needing to be shamed, which doesn't allow us to look after them very well, does it? Women are the gatekeepers. It is a woman's responsibility to dress in a way that does not cause sexual thoughts because women are responsible for men's lust. It is also women's responsibility to stop any behavior that might lead to something sexual because men cannot control themselves sexually. Okay? A woman's body belongs to, before marriage, her father. He's allowed to say what goes on with her body. After marriage, belongs to her husband. And there is no time in the interim where it belongs to her. Daughters at home movement, if anybody has heard of that aspect where the oldest daughter who is still at home is the one responsible for looking after the father. Laundry, feeding, or, food, etc., is her responsibility, not the mother's, the oldest daughter. Okay? May have come out of this aspect. The sex on the wedding night will be amazing if you wait. This is taught. And the aspect that the sex for the rest of your life will be perfect. There will never be a problem as long as you wait because of that one particular night. Except for the belief that woman can never say no. No matter what is happening to her at the moment. She may have no desire. She may be exhausted from running after a pile of kids during the day and looking after everything else. Postpartum. Oh, you popped out a baby, 3 days ago? I want sex. Let's go. Lack of desire. None of these are true reasons for her to not want sex. Neither are postpartum anxiety or depression. Sex is for the man's relief. There's release. There is no aspect in here of the fact that for enjoyment, for intimacy, for anything between the couple, because of course women don't actually like sex, so it's just simply for the man's release. Okay? Concept of soul ties. This is a really interesting one because having sex with someone means that you are tied to them forever. So you are connected to that person. You were 15 years old in your first sexual experience behind the pool house type of thing, and you're tied to that person forever, to the rest of your life. It also talks about the fact that you are also tied to everyone else that they have ever had sex with. So you imagine the web of stuff that goes on there. Okay? So some of these can get pretty intense. And then a woman's true fulfillment comes from this lifestyle and only this lifestyle. The stay-at-home wife, the trad wife movement that's going on right now. A woman's fulfillment only comes from this. Kristen.
Okay, so I know this looks intimidating. Do not read it. I will go over it. This is called the courtship process. And my mom gave me this chart around the time I got my purity ring, so about 15, 16 or so. And it was supposed to be a guide for me prior to and during any future relationships at that time. It's from the 1998 book by Don Ronacher, Choosing God's Best, Wisdom for Lifelong Romance. And after we go through it, I think you'll see how horrible that title is and misleading, really. So we're going to break down the components together. Although the chart itself, as you can see on the left here, are separated by spiritual, emotional, and physical commitment, I felt it was more important to break it down by its main patterns of coercive tactics. So instead, we're going to break it down by identity, conformity, external accountability, and purity. Now, throughout the chart, there are lots of passages that fall into each of these categories. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'm going to just highlight a couple, and we'll go through them. So the very first one is commit yourself to being sold out to Christ. This is the first passage of this chart. Yield your rights to others as Christ did for you, whatever that means. Make marriage and family decisions as one in Christ. Together, these points not only encourage enmeshment and an abandonment of personal autonomy, they teach it as a moral obligation. The following phrases push for external accountability, which serves the group's ideals instead of personal authenticity. So first, we have discuss Christ and his kingdom in group settings, discuss need for spiritual covering and accountability, and begin pre-engagement counseling, seek godly counsel to hold each other accountable. So in this context of being in this very high demand religion, you're not only encouraged to police yourself and your partner, but you have to look at constantly go into checkpoints basically and look for constant control or guidance in how to do that. These messages suggest that people are not spiritually autonomous and instead require oversight, direction, and approval from authority figures. For purity now, which is lastly but not leastly, first I want to go over actually parent training because this is in phase 3. And just for context from this whole chart, phases 1 through 3 are just in preparation for meeting somebody. And then phases 4 and beyond are after you've met someone. So before you've even met your potential partner, perhaps at 15, for example, you're already beginning to think about being a parent, regardless if you want to be a parent or not. So next is, before becoming emotionally intimate with someone else, rid yourself of emotional baggage left over from childhood and past dating relationships.
If I can stick in there, just notice this. So these 3 are supposed to be before you meet somebody, but this is also already talking about emotional baggage left over from past dating relationships. There's inconsistencies in here.
So this one, though, in particular, puts the burden of unresolved childhood trauma entirely on the individual to resolve and suggests a spiritual deficiency that needs to be corrected. This is a common characteristic of high control groups. And then lastly, this last part of the final point on this chart is may experience a need to wait a number of days after the wedding for intercourse. Because throughout this whole chart, you're constantly going through these different checkpoints of allowing yourself to be only a little bit more vulnerable, but not opening up too much. And so you're constantly slowly getting to the point of vulnerability, but by wedding, you're not even there yet. So imagine marrying someone you're unfamiliar being intimate with. It's a very stark difference from most other relationships. So when I received this chart, when I was about 16 or 15 or so, I really feared my loss of privacy. I think that was the main thing. And it obviously did not provide me with a safe space to explore my really complicated emotions that I was having in adolescence. And I just remember also kind of saying within myself that I'm just not going to date. And if I do, it's definitely going to be in secret because there's no way. This is just too much. It was overwhelming. All right. So when I was growing up, there were so many times that I felt something was off about my family, about my religion, and about my country. And it all left me asking, why? And throughout my research, I was really surprised actually that I was led to a bunch of CIA documents. And it really provided me with a lot of answers, even though these are already scrubbed and released to the public. This is what they're willing to tell us about the situations that have happened in the past relating to purity culture. So what I found out was that during the Cold War, the US government actively identified religion as a strategic tool for control, not just for their own systems of power, but also to identify foreign systems of power. The CIA significantly expanded efforts to fund and support religious movements at this time that aligned with the interests of the American ruling class. Wow. Now, before we really get into it, I just need to preface, religions are not inherently the problem, but they can be twisted into a powerful vessel that can be used to mobilize people, to challenge those in power, or to serve them. I'll go back one. No ideology is immune to corruption when power becomes the goal.
So, what does this all mean? What happened? So those strong gender roles, women do the mothering and caregiving, men looking up to the household, men do the manly stuff. This can be an issue. Only heterosexuality is what they were purporting. Nothing aside from those strong set gender roles, anything other than those strong gender roles was banned, scorned, prayed out, spanked out, beaten out, kinds of things like that. Binary thinking, pure or not. So either you've had sex or you haven't. Doesn't matter how you had it. You could have had been coerced into it. You could have been forced into it, any kind of thing. If you've had it, you're no longer pure. Man or woman, married or not, children, or not doing their job. So a woman who struggles with infertility within this kind of group means that they are going to be scorned because they're not doing their job providing children. Stay-at-home wife or not, I was a stay-at-home wife after I joined all of this stuff, but I was quite scorned when I first joined because I was working. And I would hear from people, oh, maybe someday you'll get to stay home with your children. You know? And there was never a question of, is this what you would like to do? Are you wanting to stay home? Do you have a direction in your career that you are hoping to go? None of that. It was either stay-at-home wife or not. And then there's the aspect of right or wrong. Never in between. No sex education. As a therapist, I have heard if we talk about sex, they're going to want to do it. So we're not going to teach them anything about it. Sex is shameful until you say I do, and then you will know all about it. You know, the words I do means all of a sudden you know what to do. As a therapist, I talk with a lot of women, older women who struggle through all of this. Later, if you'd like to see them, I have some models of female genitalia. And I have spoken with women who are educated nurses, doctors, intelligent women, and they look at these models and they say, Liz, I never knew that that's what my body looked like. There's no training to the man and there's no training to the woman about sex education, what their bodies look like, how their bodies work, nothing. So I have some really interesting models. Like, look, leading to a lack of teaching about consent, women's inability to say no, and a man's sense of entitlement to women's bodies. So why is this a problem? Those strong gender roles do not take into account who we're dealing with. We're dealing with people on a spectrum of sexuality. Sexuality is not a one or the other situation. We also don't take into account personality, the need for fathering as well as mothering, the need for the support of the person who's doing all the emotional labor in the house, in the relationship. Usually these days, that's the woman. In some cases, it's the man, and those men are considered less than. Okay? The recognition of who a person is, what might be considered strengths and weaknesses. I have a son who loves to cook. His wife hates to cook. She loves to clean. Okay? He does all the cooking. She does all the cleaning. They have worked out a perfect solution. Within the tenets of purity culture, that would not be allowed because she's not doing her job and he's doing something that the woman is supposed to do. Okay? The other aspect is what happens if she's better at the accounting than he is. Again, I have had women say to me, I was told to let him look after the finances and we've gone bankrupt 3 times. Whereas I know that if I looked after it, a few years, just as an aside, a few years ago, I did some study on microeconomies and microloans for women in third world countries. If the man is given a microloan to develop a business, he buys a TV. If a woman is given a loan for some money to develop a small business, she buys supplies, hires people, sends her children to school. There's something going on there. Right? Okay? So that's like not even within North America. Strong gender roles. If he strays, it is her fault for not providing his needs. If she strays, it is her fault for not sticking it through. Value is placed on virginity solely. There is nothing in there about whether the couple is compatible. Oh, he's a Christian. He believes the same thing I do. He's a virgin. Or she. Right? Never they, you notice. Lack of consent and autonomy. Her body isn't hers any longer. It's his. Never has been hers, so she sometimes doesn't even realize that there's a difference. But her body always belongs to the man in her life. She has no say in how things go. Oh, we're going to have 16 kids? Let's just pop them out. Okay? There is a lack of sex education, often no understanding of how sex works, how the body works, what it does for both of you, the knowledge of the physiology, and that men can control their urges. The abuse of the person and the system. Women not being allowed to say no extrapolates into not being allowed to acknowledge that sex can be painful for them or to get help for that pain. It's all a part of being a woman. This is what we have to do type of thing. It also, this is, okay, in the past 10 to 15 years, there has been a significant number of reports of sexual abuse by church leaders, particularly within the contingent of pastors trained within this system since the 70s and 80s. While abuse by church leaders is certainly not a new phenomenon at all, there we go. The sense of entitlement that purity culture teaches men may have been a significant factor in the number of abuses reported. Possibly. Tia Levings, I don't know if you've ever heard of Tia Levings, amazing. Everything I knew about perverse acts, I learned from pastors in the pulpit at church. Okay. Right. Dresden?
So using religious institutions as a method of mass influence is especially evident in movements like dominion theology, which it reinterprets faith as a mandate for or to seize political and cultural control. The exact definition of dominion theology is the belief that Christians are meant to take control of all aspects of society. Now, this term, dominion theology, is particularly tied to Christianity. There are other terms to describe the same phenomenon in other religious contexts. The belief that Christians, throughout history, religion has been used as a tool to legitimize coercive control and mold cultures in the image of those in power. Yeah. Now, I love this painting. This is a very famous painting. It's called American Progress, and it was painted in 1872 by John Gast. It represents the concept of manifest destiny. The central figure, Columbia, is wearing robes of white to symbolize her purity. And she, as a force, is symbolic of the US as a divine force moving westward with the tools of education and technology. And what you can see here on this side of the screen is Indigenous people and wildlife being pushed into the shadow. So this ideological push doesn't just show up on this side of the globe, though. Next, we will watch part of a protest that was conducted by Destiny Church, a fundamentalist Christian group in New Zealand. Many of the members of this church are Maori, and they use the traditional haka as a sacred dance of their people to protest and spiritually condemn a local pride parade in Auckland. Haka, a sacred Maori tradition, is a honestly beautiful expression of collective strength, spiritual connection, and ancestral identity. But Christianity is not the original theology of the Maori people. Pre-colonial Maori society embraced diverse expressions of gender and sexuality. The term takatapui was traditionally used to describe a devoted same-gender companion and has since been reclaimed by the Maori people as a way to honor both their cultural heritage and their diverse gender expressions. So prior to what is now called New Zealand, the Maori people were already there and had an established government and were in coexistence with the environment. And then the European colonizers and Christian missionaries then came and hunted down anyone who resisted the government that they wanted to put in place in New Zealand. The result has been generations of internalized shame and division, leading to the public condemnation of queer people, as seen in this parade, and a rejection within their own families. And I've definitely experienced a very similar thing, and I relate very much with them. Not because this is just not just a family conflict, but it was a result of an ideology that had been planted through generations of spiritual and political coercion. Another painting, also in the 1870s, but instead by George Henry, I'm sorry, how did you say that? Overton. I'm American. Now this was painted in the 1870s, but it was inspiration of the 1600 Puritans on their way to church. The Puritans in the 1600s established the US's northeastern colonies called New England and imagined themselves as New Israel, a chosen people forming a covenant with God on new land. And they believed that their presence was inherently righteous and that their institutions were meant to bring order to the world around them. This is a very familiar story for me. I don't know about anybody else, but we see this now echoing from 1600s, the 1800s, today. So going back now to the Cold War, when the US was using religion as a tool for public control, hold on. It was actively exporting certain ideologies to foreign societies to foster a sense of familiarity and maintain their own structures of control. Purity culture, particularly, became a forward tool of US influence, especially in countries seen as vulnerable to socialism. Gerald Dresden was a key player in this, if you remember him. Working undercover as a missionary, he directly supported a US-backed militia that sought to undermine Nicaragua's revolutionary socialist government. This government had taken power after overthrowing the US-supported Somoza dictatorship in 1979. The US responded by funding and training the Contras, a paramilitary group intended to destabilize the new leadership. And Gerald helped facilitate that connection with his planted churches in Nicaragua. The US responded by funding and training the Contras, and Gerald helped, oh, sorry, I already said that. Today, Gerald's son, Phil, you can hear it, is president of Gospel Crusade and senior pastor of the family church. You can hit it one more time. In his 30s, Phil honestly followed his father's footsteps and was photographed in a secret map room with US-backed authoritarian militia leaders. Gospel Crusade wasn't just a ministry, it was part of the so-called NRB Underground, a network of radical religious and political organizations. NRB stands for National Religious Broadcast. They had a lot of meetings and stuff that were known to the public and to like journalists, but at the same time, in the same venues, they had underground meeting rooms. And basically, this network was even included groups tied to the Unification Church of the Moonies. So that was all happening underground in the US. At the center of this web was a shared belief in dominion theology, the idea that Christians are divinely mandated to control the structures and power through political and cultural power. Okay. So in Nicaragua specifically, the Dersteins weren't just preaching, they were building bridges between the US military and those Contra leaders. At the same time, some Catholic priests in Nicaragua chose a very different path. Let's see here. Sorry. Oh no. Their role as clergy required them, they believed that their role as clergy required them to stand with the poor and resist imperialism. But Reagan, who was president at the time, didn't see it that way. He labeled both government and its supporters as communist threats. To him, the Vatican and Pope John Paul II, who you see here on the left, in particular, were essential allies in pushing back. One moment that became emblematic of this divide was that the Pope publicly wagged his finger at the Nicaraguan priest, Ernesto Cardinal, and refused to give him a blessing. This image captured a much larger conflict between two visions of what Christianity should be. One aligned with the poor and the socialist justice, and the other aligned with global political power. Another Catholic priest, similar to the last one we were just talking about, Father Xavier Gorostiaga, spent much of his life serving in Nicaragua and provides an explanation for why President Reagan was pinning these rebelling church leaders as communists. He says it's because, in Reagan's view, the church is supposed to support the rich and powerful. So when it starts helping the poor in small countries, it looks like a threat. Here is his exact words.
Why do you think that President Reagan accuses you people of being communists?
All that is communism for Reagan because the role that Christianity plays in the cultural framework of Reagan is to legitimize the established powers of the world. Okay? The church has been always with the big capitals, with the big institutions, with big contexts. Only in exceptions, the church were with the full, with the underdeveloped, with the third world countries. Now, if the church starts legitimizing the independence of these small countries, the church is delegitimizing the established powers. Then the church is a subversive element.
Sorry that the captions were a little off. I hope you still got the idea, though. We've now looked at the manifestation of dominionism throughout history and throughout the world. Besides ideology, what links all of these powerful agencies together is infrastructure. In each case, belief systems were enforced through institutions that demanded loyalty, obedience, and purity. With all of these examples, the message was the same. Your virtue is measured by your willingness to conform. My goal in presenting all of this information to you is to show you how certain systems of control can operate unnoticed on a societal level. They can shape even the most intimate parts of our lives. It's important we understand how these frameworks work so we can make informed decisions to protect ourselves and the ones we love. And if anyone recognizes this building, anyone who went to last year's conference, La Sagrada Familia, very good depiction of Catholicism and the Vatican's power and infrastructure of religion throughout the world.
So Dresden has looked at things from a global political spectrum. We're going to take a few more minutes to look at things from my perspective, which is from the couch, the tales from the couch as a therapist. What are some of the things that I have heard as a therapist, as someone who has been attempting to help women and men throughout the years with psychotherapy and counseling? So I hear many stories, much hurt, much damage. These are just a few of them. Fear of sex in general. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know how it worked. I don't understand why he wants it so often when it hurts me so much and he knows it hurts. Okay? It hurts me so much and I just have to live with it because he enjoys it so much. He thinks I'm complaining about nothing. He doesn't understand why I don't want to have sex with him. I love him. I don't want to do that because it hurts so much. Okay? I wasn't allowed to enjoy it. Even if I was having a good time, I couldn't if I did because I wasn't supposed to enjoy it because women don't enjoy sex. So I was told all of my life. Okay? I was stigmatized because I enjoyed sex. I had sex before I got married, before I came to this belief system. I enjoyed it. I had no reason not to. But there are names for women who enjoy sex. I really didn't want to say no because it was fun and it felt good. But then I got stigmatized because I did it before I got married. Even if I did it with the man I'm going to marry next week. Okay? It was kind of fun to be naughty, though. I didn't know how to say no, even though that was what I was supposed to do. I had no teaching on consent. I had no teaching on my own bodily autonomy. I didn't know how. What am I supposed to do? Okay? Okay. He wouldn't listen to me when I said no. Was that rape? Was I raped? I didn't even know what the word rape means. I've never learned. The only advice I ever got was just relax. It'll be fine if you relax. Or just do it more. It'll be fine if you keep doing it. Eventually, you'll get it all figured out. And it hurts so much, I didn't want to do it at all. I didn't know anything about what was going to happen to me. You're going to put what? Where? Huh? On my wedding night. Okay? There was no one I could talk to about what I was feeling. The only people I was allowed to speak with were people in my church, and I didn't want them to know what was going on. I was such a failure. I'm supposed to know. I said the words I do, and all of a sudden I'm supposed to magically get all this knowledge. I had no idea what to do. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody outside my sphere of influence for help. I had been immersed in purity culture before I was married. I had all of these thoughts in my mind about all of this. My husband had not been. We weren't on the same page. We couldn't figure it out. we had really struggled with understanding with each other. I was terrified of being assaulted before I got married because then no man would want me. I would not be pure anymore. So, sounds kind of crazy. I've heard all of them more than once. All right. So what do we do? This is the therapist in me. Okay, all of this. Now what are we going to do about it? So what do? There's lots of things we can do. Next page. We acknowledge that this is a problem. And we can say, okay, this is an aspect of things, something that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, because this is not something that crops up occasionally. This has to do with a view of self. I am a worthy person, and I am worthy of getting help, and I'm worthy of working towards having a relationship with my partner that is amazing. Takes some work, okay? Acknowledge the long-term effects. Read about it. Lots of books. And this is just what I could pack in a box. Read about it. Ask questions of yourself in particular. Is this a problem that I'm dealing with because of something that I was taught years ago? Okay. Think, how might my relationship be different if I didn't have all of these things from purity culture? What would I like to think about sex? How do I want to think about sex? How do I want to think about what I want to do about sex? Okay. What would I like to believe? Not what was I told and taught, but what would I like to believe? Talk. I'm a talk therapist. Can you tell? Find trusted people to chat with about your thoughts and your hang-ups. Just find somebody who's trusted. Lots of people. Call me if you want. Find medical professionals who are trained to help with the physiological aspects of this. Talk to your healthcare provider. If they don't give you the right answer, find somebody who does. Okay? Pelvic floor therapists are trained in helping women and men with the physical damage bodies may have sustained because of this abuse. Good pelvic floor therapists, they're astonishing, absolutely amazing people. Find a healthcare provider, find some somatic therapist, someone who understands all of the physiology of this. And lastly, believe, because there is hope. These are beliefs that are stuck in there. You can decide what you want to believe. And there we are. So,
like I said, we do have a link here, a QR code. You don't have to do it this way if you don't want. I know we'll probably go very quickly over this slide, but you can grab the same exact link from these cards. And like I mentioned, it does list books, scholarly articles, podcasts, and support resources. For the book section, I did separate it from secular help and Christian help. So for those of you who have decided to stay with the religion and want a healthier alternative, those resources will hopefully help you. I personally enjoyed going to both and seeing both sides. I think it's very helpful.
and if you need to connect with us, please see us at some point in the next few days or drop us an email. Thank you so much.